Guess who's back? Back again. Sick is back. Fuck your friends. Guess who's back? Guess who's back? Guess who's back? Guess who's I've created a monster, cause nobody wants to see Paulie no more. They want sick. I'm chopped liver. Well, if you want sick, this is what I give you. A little bit of me mixed with some hard liquor, some vodka that'll don't start your heart quicker than the shock when I get shocked at the hospital when I'm rocking it. Alright, anyway. Enough of that. Hello, one more again, everybody. I am back with another miniature episode of No Better Death, and today we are going to Disneyland, California, or to quote Adam Sandler from Bulletproof, Disneyland. But why would a show all about death and unnecessary fuckery be covering the most magical place on Earth? Because anywhere people gather in mass, on a regular basis, there are deaths. To date, there have been at least 20 deaths inside Disneyland, in its parking lot, or caused by events at Disneyland where people later died off property. At least 20 people. If that's how many have died at Disneyland, I can only assume that Disney World is built with concrete made from the ground-up bones of murdered children kidnapped from impoverished neighborhoods in Florida. 20 people feels like a lot for a children's play place that is supposed to be the coolest park on Earth. 20 bodies doesn't sound very family-friendly. 6 of them were people jumping or falling to their death by their own fault from the hotel or parking structures, and others were caused by people not following the rules, which is again their fault, but there have been a few that were 100% on Disney, whether due to lack of maintenance on the rides, equipment, structures, operator error, lack of safety precautions, or lack of adequate security, law enforcement, and medical care. And this last one is what we're taking a look at today. Now ultimately, this death is not on Disney, but some asshole killed some other asshole. But Disney's response to getting the injured person medical care did play a big role in this guy's death. We're going to discuss the first homicide to occur inside Disneyland. You're probably asking, if this is a homicide, how is it on Disneyland? When this happened in 1981, Disneyland security was rather lax by today's standards, and that's a problem. But the even bigger problem is that they didn't allow uniformed police officers nor real ambulances on the property. It would break the magical spell. Having adequately trained and prepared emergency services on site would break the spell they cast that makes parents pay $30 for a plush crab or whatever from the movie with the singing crab. If you got hurt inside Disneyland and needed police assistance or an ambulance, you had to wait for Disney security to slowly drive across the park at the pace of pedestrians so as not to alert anyone or break the spell, have them pick you up completely unprepared to deal with or treat any medical issue, then slowly drive your ass to the exit where hopefully cops or an ambulance were waiting. If not, you then had to make the ride to the hospital or police station in that same van. So say if you got stabbed and were bleeding to death inside Disneyland in 1981, there was a good chance you would die before you got to the hospital. Anyway, this is supposed to be a mini episode. I need to quit babbling. Let's get to the story. March 7th, 1981. 18-year-old, and I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name, Melanchthon Christian Yorba, known to friends and family as Mel, which is way easier to say than whatever that Old Testament bullshit was, the first one, entered Disneyland with 4 friends March 7th, 1981, for a special ticket Disney party hosted by a local radio station. By some accounts, the teenager and his friends were pretty tanked when they got to the park. Drunk or not, Yorba pinched the butt of a passing girl who immediately alerted her boyfriend, 28-year-old James O'Driscoll. And he wasn't having that shit, right? Some dude pinched his girl's ass. He started chasing Mel around the park. O'Driscoll caught up with Mel in Tomorrowland, where Mel popped him in the jaw. O'Driscoll fell to the ground, pulling Mel down with him, tussling as they went. At this point, O'Driscoll claims Mel tried to choke him, and then Mel managed to fall over on O'Driscoll's 8.5-inch hunting knife twice, stabbing him in the chest. After that, O'Driscoll attempted to run from the park, but Anaheim police were waiting for him at the exits as uniformed police weren't allowed inside. So they just waited for this dude who had just stabbed this kid to voluntarily run out of the park. What cop would stand there? Like, I don't think there's any legal thing saying that cops can't go on Disneyland. If a crime's being committed inside, if someone is getting murdered, you don't wait for the murderer to run past you. You go inside and do your job. In the meantime, Mel was sprawled out on the ground, bleeding to death. A registered nurse who happened to be visiting the park applied pressure to the wounds in his abdomen and chest and nervously waited for an ambulance in a critical situation where every second counts, and she waited a long time. After 20 minutes, a Disney first aid van finally arrived on scene. It was Disneyland policy that an actual ambulance was not to be called to the park. No real-life intrusions were allowed at the happiest place on Earth. So we're talking a plain everyday van without the needed medical equipment for a case like this and no sirens slowly making its way through Disneyland. This was another 11 minutes before Mel could receive desperately needed medical attention. The van's driver later testified that there was quite a bit of traffic that night. Mel was pronounced dead upon arrival at Palm Harbor Hospital in Garden Grove 20 to 25 minutes after he was stabbed. The knife had pierced his heart, diaphragm, and liver. He was driven to the hospital in an unmarked van by a Disneyland nurse. The only possibility was to plug the wound to the heart immediately, and that could only be done at a hospital, according to Dr. Robert Barros, an emergency room physician who treated Mel at Palm Harbor Hospital. He said, "I think only God could have saved him." Fire Battalion Chief Charles Cannonbly, I don't know how to pronounce that, said the trip to Tomorrowland by his paramedics would have taken about 9 minutes had someone called them and let them into the park rather than insisting on driving the victim to the hospital in a Disneyland vehicle with a Disney nurse. The police arrested James O'Driscoll and Julie Holdener, his girlfriend, both from San Diego. Mr. O'Driscoll pleaded not guilty to a charge of murder, and charges were dropped against Julie, the girl whose ass Mel had pinched, due to lack of evidence. But I don't think, what did she really do? She didn't do anything. Some asshole sexually assaulted her and she notified her boyfriend. That's it. I'm sure she didn't expect her boyfriend to react by stabbing this guy to death. She probably just expected him to punch him once or twice and call him a jerk and then go about his day, but this went horribly wrong. After Mel's death, some Orange County health officials said that Disneyland was reluctant to call for outside help because it would damage their image, and of course, Disneyland denied this, stating that that's never been the case and never will be. A month after Mel's death, which was the first murder at Disneyland, his family filed a wrongful death suit against Disney as well as O'Driscoll and Palm Harbor Hospital for $60 million. "We're not going to settle out of court," said Jack Lindquist, Senior Vice President of Walt Disney Productions. "We're going to take it as far as we can." The family of Mel Yorba, who was 18 years old at the time, filed the suit which charges that Disneyland failed to provide the guy with adequate emergency medical treatment. The suit asserted that Disneyland refused to summon outside paramedics to help the victim and instead relied on its own staff to care for and transport Mel to the hospital. They had an opportunity to make this incident less severe by giving adequate medical attention, said his mother. But they made a conscious decision long ago that they didn't want ambulances or flashing sirens around to shatter their image. It took 5 years for the case to come to trial, and when it did, Disney weakly tried to claim that it did have procedures in place for paramedics to be called in case of emergencies. They just weren't called in this case because the nurse at the scene was inexperienced. And I don't know if they're talking about the nurse from the crowd who happened to be there and helped out, or the actual Disney nurse who was driving the van. I'm assuming the Disney nurse, but it doesn't really clarify. The jury pretty much said nice try and ordered Disney to cough up $600,000 in a settlement to Mel's family. While this trial was going on, a floor beneath him in the same courthouse, James O'Driscoll went to court for second-degree murder charges in Mel's death. His first trial deadlocked, leading to a second. The jury didn't buy his story that Mel just happened to roll over onto his upright hunting knife twice and found him guilty. The judge in the case called O'Driscoll a walking time bomb with a chip on his shoulder and told him, "You were in a public place unnecessarily armed with a deadly weapon and you killed a stranger. Even if it was true somebody grabbed your girlfriend's rear end, it didn't justify killing." And that's pretty much what I said when I read this story. Like, why is a dude walking around with a knife in Disneyland? You know, every now and then in the store, I'll see somebody with an open carrying a gun through like Walmart, and I always want, like, my kids have asked before, like, why is that guy walking through the store with a gun? And part of me, I know some people genuinely think they need it for defense, but like, you know, there's a few that are just waiting to hurt somebody. They're walking through a Walmart with children around and a gun showing. You know, they're kind of waiting for an opportunity to shoot somebody. And it sounds like this is what this guy was doing. He had a knife in Disneyland. He was waiting to stab somebody, and the opportunity presented itself. O'Driscoll's sentencing fell around the same time he was scheduled to get married to Julie, so she stayed with him after he murdered someone 10 years his junior in a children's park. I know she probably expected him to hit the kid, some display of testosterone, but this was ridiculous. This dude murdered somebody who was barely legal, and she stayed with this guy. He got 16 years, which was reduced to 8 in light of the fact that he had not technically started the attack, even though he was chasing Mel threw the first punch. And in my opinion, he did kind of start the whole thing by grabbing somebody's ass. I know he didn't expect to get murdered, but he had to expect a reaction. Disneyland's squeaky clean reputation took a bit of a hit because of the incident, and to make matters worse, several incidents of preventable deaths followed, including a woman who died of a seizure and a man who suffered a fatal heart attack. Both were transported to the hospital in the same slow-ass van that transported Mel. After meeting with county health professionals who had been requesting such a meeting for years anyway, Disneyland finally caved in and hired a professional ambulance service. So now they can actually help you, or supposedly can help you if you get injured there, which seems to happen a lot. The 20 or so I mentioned earlier were just deaths. The injuries are countless. But again, expectation and reality are often two different things, so while there are now paramedics on site, you might want to be extra alert while you're there and follow the safety rules and use common sense. That's the important part that seems to be less common than you think. And don't get injured there in the first place, right? That is the story of Mel Yarbo and the first homicide at Disneyland. And this has been the third installment of the mini-series. NoBetterDeath.info for all information on No Better Death. Anything you need to know is right there. Tell your friends about the show. Leave an iTunes review if you'd be so kind. I am your host, Sick Grayson. Until next time, try not to die.